There is a boat on the Sea of Galilee, caught in a sudden, violent storm. The disciples, many of them professional fishermen, are completely panicked and convinced they are about to die. Yet, amidst the shouting, the spray, and the boat filling with water, Jesus is genuinely, deeply asleep on a cushion in the stern. For 2,000 years, readers of this story have focused on the miracle, the wind that obeyed and the waves that stopped. But what if the sleep itself wasn't just what happened before the miracle? The sleep was already the answer, a profound theological statement, and a sermon that the disciples missed entirely. Welcome to explaining the secret meaning of the first miracle Jesus performed in absolute silence. Today we are going to explore the hidden meaning behind that sleep and discover how true peace isn't found in the absence of a storm, but in knowing exactly who is resting in your boat. There is a boat on the Sea of Galilee. The storm came without warning, the way storms always come on that lake. Cold air dropping off the eastern mountains and hitting the warm water with the force of something that has been building in silence and arrives all at once. The waves are breaking over the sides. The boat is filling. The disciples, several of them professional fishermen who have spent their entire lives on this water, are convinced they are about to die. And Jesus is asleep. Not pretending, not performing some kind of spiritual demonstration for their benefit, genuinely, deeply asleep on a cushion in the stern, unconscious through the spray and the shouting and the sound of the boat straining against water that wants to swallow it. The disciples wake him. "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He stands up. He speaks to the wind and the waves, and there is a great calm. Galene megale in Greek, a great stillness. Not just the absence of storm, but the presence of something that was not there before. And then he turns to them. "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" For 2,000 years, readers of this scene have focused on the miracle, the wind that obeyed, the waves that stopped, the words that did what only God's words are supposed to do. But I want to talk about the sleep, because the sleep was not nothing. The sleep was not simply what happened before the miracle. The sleep was already the answer, already the statement, already the thing the disciples needed to understand before they needed to understand how a man could speak to weather. The sermon was the sleep, and the disciples missed it entirely. They woke up the one who was already at peace in their storm, because they did not understand that peace was already in the boat. What does it mean that Jesus slept? It means that the storm had no power to disturb what was in him. Not because he was oblivious to the water. He was a man of flesh and bone, and he felt the spray and heard the wind and was in the same boat as the people being thrown around it. But something in him was not subject to the storm's authority over the situation. Something in him was resting in a place that water could not reach. The disciples were afraid because they knew the storm. Jesus was asleep because he knew something the storm did not. He knew who set the limits of the sea. Job 38. God speaking from the whirlwind. "Who shut up the sea behind doors? When I said, 'This far you may come and no farther,' here is where your proud waves halt." The one who drew that line in the beginning is asleep on the cushion, and the line has not moved. The storm cannot go further than its limits, and the one who knows the limits is not worried about whether the limits will hold. The peace in the boat before the miracle is the theological statement the miracle was designed to explain. He was not afraid. He was not afraid because he knew something the disciples were not yet equipped to know. He was not afraid because the authority he possessed over the storm was not something he exercised only in moments of action. It was something he rested in. The disciples woke him up to perform a miracle. What they interrupted was a sermon. The sermon was the sleep. And then there is a sentence, one of the most famous sentences in the Gospel of Matthew, one of the most quoted sentences in the entire New Testament, a sentence so familiar that most people have heard it so many times, it has lost the power to actually land. Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I want you to hear this sentence the way a first century Jewish audience would have heard it, not as a motivational poster, not as a comforting reassurance, not as a sentence designed to make a hard season feel more manageable, as a theological claim of extraordinary scope. Because this sentence has a history. Exodus 33:14. Moses is on the mountain, interceding for the people after the golden calf disaster. He is desperate, not just for the journey ahead, but for the assurance that God will be present on it. And God says to him, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. The rest is not a destination. The rest is the condition produced by the presence. Moses does not receive rest when he arrives somewhere. He receives rest because God goes with him. The going with is the rest. The presence is the peace. And then Jesus stands in Galilee and says, come to me. Not come to a place, not come to a practice, not come to a set of behaviors that will reduce your anxiety. Come to me, and I will give you the thing that Exodus promised and the whole tradition was pointing toward: rest. The Greek word is anapausis, not sleep, not vacation, not the temporary suspension of activity. Rest as in the cessation of striving. Rest as in the end of the exhausting work of trying to hold the world together by the force of your own effort. Rest as in the condition of someone who has finally understood that they do not have to. Jesus is not offering a strategy. He is offering himself, because the rest he gives is the same rest he demonstrated in the boat. The rest of someone who knows who holds the limits of the sea, who knows where the authority actually resides, who does not have to panic about the storm because the storm does not have the final word. He is asleep on the cushion, and he is inviting you to learn what made that possible. There's a title Jesus claims for himself that most people read past without stopping. Mark chapter 2. The Pharisees are challenging him about his disciples picking grain on the Sabbath. Jesus answers them with two examples from Scripture and then drops a sentence that reframes the entire conversation. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Lord of the Sabbath. Not Lord of the temple, not Lord of the Torah. Lord of the most sacred time, the day that God himself rested after 6 days of creating the universe, the day written into the structure of the world before there was a temple or a Torah. He is the Lord of that day. And the writer of Hebrews takes this claim and draws out what it means. Hebrews chapter 4. There remains, then, a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their own work, just as God did from his. Rest from their own work. The Sabbath was never simply about not working on a specific day. The Sabbath was the weekly reenactment of a theological truth. The truth that the work of sustaining the world belongs to God and not to you. You stop working on the seventh day, not because the work is finished, but because you are not the one who holds the world together. You rest because the universe does not depend on your effort to keep running. And Jesus says, I am the Lord of that day. He is not just Lord over the Sabbath as a day on the calendar. He is the living embodiment of what the Sabbath was always pointing toward. The rest that God's presence produces, the cessation of striving that comes when you understand who is actually holding things together. He is the Sabbath personified. He is the rest made flesh. This is why the sleep in the boat is not just a detail about a tired rabbi after a long day of teaching. It is a theological statement about who he is. When Jesus sleeps in the storm, he is demonstrating what it looks like to be at rest in the authority that created and sustains everything, including the storm. When he says, "Come to me, and I will give you rest," he is offering himself, the Sabbath Lord, the living resting place, the one in whom the striving ends. The disciples are panicking. Jesus is asleep, not because he is more relaxed than them, because he knows something they do not yet know. And the thing he knows is not information, it is identity. And now we come to the scene that most people would not expect to appear in a video about rest: Gethsemane, the garden on the slope of the Mount of Olives, late night. Jesus takes Peter and James and John deeper into the garden and says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He goes further, falls on his face. "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." And the disciples fall asleep. But notice carefully what kind of sleep this is. This is not the sleep of someone at rest. This is the sleep of people who have been overwhelmed, whose bodies and minds have shut down under the weight of a situation they cannot process. Luke tells us they fell asleep from sorrow, not from peace, from the inability to remain conscious in the face of what was coming. This is the sleep of collapse. Jesus is awake. He is anguished, genuinely, physically, cosmically anguished, to the point where Luke records the hematidrosis, the capillaries rupturing under extreme psychological pressure. He is not performing serenity. He is in the full weight of what is coming, and he is not numbing it or collapsing under it. He prays 3 times the same prayer, each time returning to find the disciples asleep, each time going back to the Father, each time the cup remains. And then something shifts. An angel appears, not to remove the cup, to strengthen him to drink it. And Jesus rises, and he says, "Rise, let us go. The hour has come." He is not panicking. He is not frantic. He is moving toward the thing that is coming, toward Judas and the soldiers and the arrest and everything that follows, with the particular composure of someone who has set down his own preference and picked up the Father's purpose. The peace he has is not the peace of the storm having passed. The storm has not passed. The cup has not been removed, but the striving is over. He has rested in the Father's will, and having set down, "Let this cup pass from me," and picked up, "Not as I will, but as you will," he is at rest. Not because the circumstances are resolved, because he knows who holds the circumstances. This is the same rest he had on the cushion in the boat. The disciples slept from sorrow in Gethsemane. Jesus rested from trust. These are not the same thing. Sorrow sleep is collapse. Trust rest is the deliberate setting down of what you were never meant to carry in the presence of the one who was always meant to carry it. And the difference between those two kinds of sleep is the difference between the life Jesus was inviting people into and the life most of them were already living. The Pharisees were exhausted. The crowds who followed Jesus were exhausted. The system of religious requirements that the first century had built around the Torah had produced a population of people straining under the weight of what they were trying to do for God. They were working for rest, and the working was what made the rest impossible. Jesus says, "Come to me," because the rest is not at the end of the striving. The rest is what happens when the striving stops. And the striving stops not when the circumstances change, But when you finally understand what Jesus understood in the boat and demonstrated in the garden, that the one who holds the limits of the sea is not you and never was. Now step back and look at what has been building across this entire video. A man asleep in a filling boat while professional sailors are convinced they are dying. A sentence that reaches back to Sinai and forward to Hebrews. Come to me and I will give you rest. A title claimed in a Sabbath dispute that announces something far larger. I am the Lord of the rest that God modeled at the foundation of the universe. And a garden at midnight where Jesus rests into the Father's will while his closest disciples collapse under sorrow they cannot carry. 4 moments, 1 pattern. The rest of Jesus is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of someone who knows who holds the difficulty. Here's what the rest of Jesus is not. It is not the absence of pain. He wept at Lazarus' tomb. He sweat blood in Gethsemane. The rest he carries does not eliminate the weight of what it feels like to be human in a broken world. It is not the absence of urgency. He moves through the Gospels with a specific awareness of his hour, of the work that needs to be done. It is not the absence of sorrow. His soul was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death in Gethsemane. He said so. What it is, what the sleep in the boat and the rising from Gethsemane and the invitation of Matthew 11:28 are all pointing at, is the absence of the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to be the final authority over your own life. The disciples were panicking in the boat because the storm was bigger than they were, and they were the ones responsible for surviving it. They were doing the math, and the math was not working. The responsibility was on them, and the resources were insufficient, and the gap between what was required and what they had was producing the specific terror of people who are responsible for something they cannot control. Jesus was asleep because he was not responsible for the weather. He knew who was. And the moment you understand who is actually responsible for holding the world together, the boat stops being terrifying. Not because the waves get smaller, because the question of who is in charge of the waves has been answered. And the answer is not you. It was never you. The striving that produced the exhaustion was always built on a false premise. The premise that the outcome depended on the force of your effort. It did not. It does not. Hebrews 4:10. Anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their own work, just as God did from his. You rest from your own work, not from all work, but from the specific work of trying to accomplish through human effort what only God can accomplish through divine presence. You set down the weight you were carrying under the false impression that the weight was yours to carry. And what you discover when you set it down is not emptiness. It is the cushion in the stern. Stay with me, because this is the most important thing in this video. The disciples did not need more information to find peace in that storm. They had all the information they needed. Jesus was in the boat. They knew he was in the boat. They had watched him heal the sick and cast out demons and teach with an authority the scribes had never managed. And they were still terrified. Because knowing about someone who can calm storms is not the same as resting in the presence of the one who can calm storms. The disciples knew the right things. They had not yet learned to rest in the right person. Matthew 11:28 is the invitation to close that gap, not to acquire more information, not to learn more theology, to come, to be in the presence, to rest not in what you know about Jesus, but in Jesus himself, the Sabbath Lord made flesh, the one who demonstrates what rest looks like by sleeping through the thing that is terrifying you. The invitation is not learn to be calmer. The invitation is come to the one who is calm. And the coming produces the calm, not the other way around. Now the pattern completes. In the boat, Jesus rests. The disciples panic. He wakes. He speaks. The storm stops. And the question he asks them is not, did you not see the miracle? It is, why are you afraid? Because the point was not the miracle. The point was the sleep. The faith that would have recognized the miracle had already begun the moment Jesus got into the boat. In Gethsemane, the disciples sleep from sorrow. Jesus prays from trust. He rises. He walks toward the cross with the steadiness of someone who is not carrying the weight of the final outcome. In Matthew 11, the invitation stands, come, all of you. Not the ones whose storms have already passed. All of you who are weary and burdened, come to me, and I will give you an apausis, the rest that Exodus promised and the Sabbath modeled, and the boat demonstrated, and Gethsemane confirmed. The rest that is in the presence, not after the storm, in it. There are three things I want you to carry out of this. The first is this: the sleep in the boat was already the answer. The miracle was the explanation of the answer. The peace was there before anyone recognized it, and the peace is in your boat right now, not after the storm passes, already. The one who is Lord of the Sabbath and Lord of the sea is in your boat. The question is whether you have learned to rest in the presence that is already there. The second is this: there are two kinds of sleep in this story, the sleep of sorrow and the rest of trust. The disciples collapsed under what they could not carry. Jesus rested in the one who was carrying it. Both look like stillness from the outside. They are completely different things on the inside. Sorrow sleep is what happens when your resources run out. Trust rest is what happens when you finally set down what was never yours to carry. If you are exhausted right now, not physically tired, but soul tired, the invitation is not to try harder. It is to stop trying to carry what belongs to the Father. The third, and this is the one I want you to sit with. He said, come to me, not come to a practice, not come to a discipline, not come to a theology of rest that once mastered will produce the peace you are looking for. Come to me, to the person, to the one who demonstrates what he is offering by sleeping in your storm, to the one who is Lord of the day that was always meant to remind you that the world does not depend on your effort to keep running. Come to him, and he will give you rest, not eventually. The Greek is present tense. I will give you now, in the coming. The rest is not at the destination. The rest is in the presence of the one you are coming to. The moment you come, you are already in the rest, because the rest was never a place you were trying to get to. It was always a person. If this video meant something to you, leave a comment below with the words, peace be still. Just that. And if you know someone who is exhausted, not physically tired, but soul tired, weary in the way that no amount of sleep fixes, burdened in the way that the disciples were burdened before they understood who was in their boat, share this with them. Not because it will immediately stop their storm, but because sometimes the most important thing a person can hear is that the one who is Lord of the storm is already in their boat, and he is resting, which means they can too. We will see you in the next one.